What's up, Freedom Church? How we feeling this morning? So nervous about this right now. My name is Justice. I'm the lead pastor, and we are doing something we've never done before. So if you're new, today, we're so glad you're here. We put together this whole series of teachings that's kind of continuing to unfold based off questions that are coming in online. And we invited our friends and our neighbors and our families to ask questions about faith, and we're hearing a lot of great stuff. And, as those questions come in, we'll kind of figure out what should take priority on a Sunday, and we'll try to answer as many as we can online. But today is week 1 of 7, so you turn to the person next to you and say, we're going on a journey, 7 weeks, let them know. 7 weeks. And so today, I just thought we'd just go with the craziest one right out the gate. I got this question that came in online and just said this: did Adam have a belly button? I have all the hundreds of questions. I'm like, did Adam have an? And then he signed at the bottom, jokesoonyou@gmail.com. I'm just like, jokes on me? I think that's a good question. Did Adam have a belly button? I mean, I'm not like a belly button guy. I don't think about navels a lot, but I'm just wondering, Adam, did he have a belly button? Because if he was created by God, just fresh from the ground, why would he have a belly button? Wouldn't that be connected to a predecessor or whatnot? And if he didn't have a belly button, what does that mean? So we're just kind of gonna get into that right now. So I just know that when I talk about this stuff today, there's no way everybody in this room is gonna agree. There's no way. Christians are notorious for not agreeing with each other. Have you noticed this? Have you noticed how bad we are at agreeing? Not to even say you're a Christian. Maybe you're not a Christian. You're just here checking things out, and I'm so glad you're here. Are we glad that they're here if you're new? Hey, this is a church where you can belong before you believe, okay? You don't have to clap. You don't got to stand up. You don't got to write a check. You don't got to do any of that, okay? You're here to just be in our space, and we want to love you. We want to make sure you feel right at home. And somewhere along the line, somebody did that for us. And so we're glad that you're here. And for some of you, it's a miracle to be here because you're like, what am I even doing in a church? And we all get it. I invited my friend to church the other day, and he walked in, and I'm like, what's wrong? And he's walking slowly through the courtyard. I'm like, what's wrong? He's like, I thought I was going to catch on fire. Christians don't agree on everything, though. So, that's might split the room right here. A couple weeks ago, there was a guy outside our service with a bullhorn. I don't know if you saw that. But he had a bullhorn, and he was just talking all this trash about our church, and he said God told him to be here and to bring his bullhorn and to say all these things and saying things about me and saying things about our church. And one of the things he was saying on this bullhorn was your pastor preaches the prosperity gospel, whatever that means, and blah, 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 blah. And I didn't even go over there and talk to him, but somebody went over there and they're like, excuse me, sir, our pastor drives a Kia. So, I think I just sabotaged my own street cred right now. Listen, it's got leather, it's paid off, okay? I got 3 kids, all right? So don't judge me. But anyways, I didn't even talk to that guy. But I just know that the truth is, hopefully somebody ordered him pizza. You know what I mean? Somebody should have bought him something next time that happens, somebody buy him something from the food truck and just take it over there to him. Look, here's the deal, is that, we're not going to land on the same thing today. Hopefully we'll land on some big ideas, but some ideas are close-handed and some ideas are big-handed, open-handed, right? So like the Bible is true and Jesus is God, closed-handed issue. We believe that. That's going to be a foundation of our faith. But then there's other things that are just not that big of a deal, and we can agree to disagree. And, even the person that helped me study for a lot of this, even the research and some of the people that I read and the pastors that helped me, they don't agree on the same things, they don't agree on the same thing. One of them who was helping me doesn't believe that women should be pastors. He believes when he reads the Bible that you should read it this particular way, and here's a problem with that. My wife's a pastor, right? She preaches better than me. All the wise decisions that come out of our staff meetings are usually from her. So she'd preach more if I could get her, but she's always taking care of our kids or something like that. I don't know. But the thing is that me and him are really close friends. And the fact that even though I could take that personal, you don't think my wife should be a pastor. You think dude, that's never been an issue. Because if Christians, we should be people that can extend grace and love each other even when we don't disagree. And I just wonder if maybe God has left so many things up to interpretation so that we can kind of lead the front on that. Let's just be Christians that agree to disagree. If we can love each other even when we don't agree on stuff, then maybe there is hope for a world that doesn't agree with us that we can live with, right? Let's get into dinosaurs. All right. Genesis chapter 2, if you want to turn there with me, we're going to talk about dinosaurs. We're going to talk about aliens, hopefully, if we have enough time. We're going to talk about evolution. I was driving my kid to school the other day. I have 3 kids. Logan is 9. The other day was about 3 years ago, now that I think about it. And I'm driving him to first grade. And so, how old are you in first grade? 6? Yeah, he's about 6 at the time. And he's in the back seat, which is usually where he is when I drive. And I'm like, what are you thinking about back there or the stoplight? Aliens. I think this is when Guardians of the Galaxy came out, So I'm like, okay, what about aliens? He's like, Dad, do you think aliens are real? And I was like, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think aliens are real? And he goes, I don't know, but I'm thinking I need to become an astronaut. And I said, all right, so you can take a rocket ship to space and find some aliens? And it's like, no, so I could take a rocket ship to the moon. Dad, would you help me when I get older go to the moon? Kid's 6. Set up chairs so we can invite all the aliens to the moon so that we can have church. And I could tell them about the one who created them. Are you kidding me? I'm in 3rd place. My wife is the best preacher. Then my son, he's the best preacher. And then me. Because the truth is like something just intrinsically, he's like, if there are aliens, then they were created by God. And do they know their creator or not? Because if not, I should be the one to tell them. That's nuts. Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light, and God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and there was evening, and there was morning on the first day. Later, it goes on to talk about more creation events, but in the first chapter of 1 and 2 of Genesis, we have this creation story, narrative, this sequence of events where God creates things kind of day by day. And on the 6th day, on the last day, he made something really special, which is he makes mankind. Now, in that story, he does not talk about dinosaurs necessarily. So where does dinosaurs fit in all of this? And then how does science and what science says about evolution and the way things, the age of the earth and all that, how does that fit? And really what I think I could try to do today in the next few minutes that I have is I just kind of want to present like one way of thinking about it, which is kind of a traditional, I don't even know if I should use the word traditional because it's not traditional, but this literal interpretation of the creation events. Like literal interpretation. There's this perspective that when it says that God spoke everything into existence, that God therefore has a mouth. And this mouth kind of looks like a human mouth, and he speaks, and these words kind of create life, and then this all happens on day 1. And then there's a literal 24 hours. At the end of those 24 hours, then, there's this other kind of sequence. And then all these things happen, and then it all kind of like crescendos with the creation of man, and this is how this really happens. And so there's this literal interpretation of creation, and that's over here. So I'm just going to kind of stand over on this side of the stage when I talk about it. Literal interpretation, right? And then there's another group of people that look at that differently, and they say, let's talk about what science has discovered as far as, like I mentioned, the age of the earth and how species are connected. And let's talk about evolution and that theory. And I think historically, this has been an issue for people because, there has been this polarizing divide that, if you look at things as literal, then you're ignorant. And, if you look at things as evolutionary, right, humanistic, naturalistic thinking, that you're intelligent. And at least that's the way that I kind of saw it growing up. And my story is that I grew up in church, but then I left for a long time, and then I came back at about 20 years old. And I just remember that feeling that, there was enemies between science and faith, right? I just remember that feeling, And in my study, and I can't get to everything, but I can point you to some people who stand over here, renowned scholars, renowned Christians, renowned, Cambridge University professors, and that believe evolution and its theory as a description of how life has evolved, and it does not compromise their faith in a creator. And one of them is Dr. Francis Collins. I don't know if you know who he is, but back in the early 90s, he was the leader of the Human Genome Project, and he's won a lot of awards and written some incredible books, and Harvard professor and all this kind of stuff. And he'll go do his lectures where he will talk about evolution, and he'll talk about species and all this stuff, and he will use that to inform people of a creator, and he will use that science, and after he presents stuff, he will pull out his guitar, and he will sing worship songs with people and lead them to Christ. So, and I saw that on YouTube, and you can believe anything that you see on YouTube, so there you go. Google Dr. Francis Collins. Brilliant guy, breakthroughs in the study of DNA, and he's a geneticist. Dude's way smarter than me, way smarter than any of us probably, okay, guys? And he's able to stand there and say, hey, there's no compromise between what I believe in science and what I believe in the Bible. And in fact, I was reading just off pbs.org, I was just reading an interview that was with him about how he came to faith. And in his interview, he's like, yeah, I was a doctor, and I kept watching patients who were suffering, and rather than blaming their God and running, they kept pressing into their faith, and their hope was changing the things that were going on in their body and their quality of life. And their faith, I was seeing something there, and I got scared because I realized that I had come to my own conclusions about God based off science, but I had not done the deductive, reasoning on my own to get to a place of who is this God that they're rejecting. And I just took a little section out of that interview, and he said, actually, I don't see any of the issues that people raise as points of contention between science and faith are at all difficult to resolve. Once again, this is Dr. Francis Collins, if you want to look at any of his stuff. Many people get hung up on the whole evolution versus creation argument, and one of the great tragedies of the last 100 years is that the way in which this has been so polarizing. On one hand, we have scientists who basically adopt evolution as their faith, and think there's no need for God to explain why life exists. And on the other hand, we have people who are believers who are so completely sold on the literal interpretation of the first book of the Bible that they are rejecting very compelling scientific data about the age of the earth and its relatedness to living beings. It's unnecessary. I think God gave us an opportunity through the use of science to understand the natural world. And the idea that some are asking people to disbelieve our scientific data in order to prove that they believe in God is so unnecessary. So you got this guy who, he's looking at this stuff, kind of leaning on some Charles Darwin stuff, looking at how this kind of comes together, and it's actually encouraging his faith in some ways, and he's using that as a testimony. And I thank God for a man like that, whether you believe it or not. That's somebody who's saying, I'm going to love God with all my mind. And I thank God for you because that's why you're here. Jesus says, love God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your soul, with all your what? Mind. The fact that you're here today, you're seeking God. Did you know that? Even if you are not a Christian, did you know God is honored by you being here today because you are seeking him? I love that you're here today. I love that you're asking these questions. And even if we don't land anywhere in this talk, you're off to a great start. Okay? We got Dr. Francis Collins saying this kind of stuff. And then, there are just as wise of arguments of people who are saying, no, the Bible should be taken literally in these exact places and blah, 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 blah. And that's also equally presentable. You saw in the video a minute ago one of those voices. And so where do we kind of land? Is there a convergence at all in between there? And I look at Charles Darwin, believe it or not, and in his book, The Origin of the Species, he says this. Remember, he died in 1880 something, okay? So the textbooks that we are kind of leaning on, they're 40, 50, 60 years old, okay? Some of the stuff that we're reading. And as I read this, you might be thinking about graphs in your mind or amoebas and one-cell organisms and all that kind of stuff and microscopes. But he says this. He says, there is a grandeur in the view of life with its several powers. This is Charles Darwin. There's a grandeur in life with its several powers. Having been originally breathed by a creator, capital C, into a few forms or into one, and that, whilst this planet has gone cycling according to the fixed laws of gravity from so simple a beginning, endless forms of both beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. So there's Charles Darwin talking about a creator. So if the staples kind of like the literal kind of creationist view are like literal 24 hours made according to each kind, the scripture says, the literal tradition, then you kind of swing over here and you get this other kind of staples to the, like think about a stool that's supported by 3 legs. Here's kind of the 3 legs to the stool and the evolutionary, naturalistic discussion, okay? The first one would be that all things came from non-living matter. That's like number one. Like, we have life, but that life is here. It started with something that wasn't alive. It came from non-living matter. Something launched this sequence of this transitions, okay? There was non-living matter, and then there was living matter, right? That's number one. The number 2 is common ancestry, meaning that all things get traced back down to a one-celled organism, right? And that becomes an amoeba, which becomes an amphibian, which becomes a fish or a reptile or however that works, right? And that just eventually a whale becomes a horse over the course of billions of years, right? Like, this all common ancestry. They all had this place where it started, right? Boom. So you have like this naturalistic view of non-living matter is where it started, then living matter. All of it gets traced back to like a launch point or a start, this linkage transition of species, right? And then the last one is you have this naturalistic evolutionary mindset, we call it survival, of the fittest, right? We call it the idea that you're always thinking about yourself, you're always putting yourself first. That's part of your evolutionary design to protect yourself, and as your brain is growing and making choices and decisions, you're coming down. It's all based on natural selection. It's like it's natural to think this way. And I was talking to my friend of mine who wrote a book about science and God, and he was just saying, he's like, think about it this way. A shark doesn't go swimming through the ocean thinking, I should have a family. I'm going to find a potential spouse out here. I'm going to do some shark flirting. Maybe do some interviews. Maybe some shark speed dating. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Oh, there's somebody. Nice little candidate. Nice teeth. Oh, Justice, stop with the dad jokes. Is that how that works? Is he like, hey, baby, thoughts? No. What's he do? Forcibly copulates with that shark, right? What's that called? It's called rape. That's how this shark is like, this is the evolutionary thinking of the brain of the shark, natural selection. I need to get my seed into the next generation. I need to, in order to live, this is what I got to do. So he forcibly copulates, right? We don't look at that in animals, though, and call that rape. We call it forcibly copulating. Or maybe there's a lion, and he's like, look at that antelope, right? I'm going to go eat that bad boy right there. We don't call that murder. We call that natural selection, right? Great documentary on this called The Lion King and the Circle of Life. Right? So we have these kind of ideas that exist in this, almost like prehistoric thinking, like this species, right? Like this animalistic kind of thinking, right? And that's where that is supposedly supposed to evolve. Like, and then you could even think right now, what's going on now with all that? Because now man doesn't think that way anymore. Things have changed. So you're starting to kind of look at maybe where some of the holes are in some of this. So let's swing back over here to the creation thinking, because the literal interpretation, I just never thought about it. Like it wasn't part of me coming to know Christ. It wasn't part of me understanding a loving God. Like me thinking about Genesis 1 and 2 being literal or not, just never really, the story of creation is just so brilliant. It's my favorite story in all the Bible. It's so brilliant that I never stopped to think like, was that a talking snake really a talking snake? Like I never thought about that. And you know why I didn't think about that? Because it didn't matter. So just work with me on this for a second. What if I told you that this is what happened to me? I'm in Bible college. I got this teacher. The teacher is brilliant, right? Now I'm going for my bachelor's degrees, and there's a seminary inside my college, so I'm filling up all my electives with Bible classes. I'm on fire for Christ. I'm excited. I'm on fire. That was the temperature of my soul. Fire for God. And I'm like, no, I don't want to take PE. I want to take Bible. And there was this class called Biblical Languages and Exegesis. And that sounded like I was going to come out of that class smarter than all you fools. So I was like, I'm going to take that class. Turns out Biblical Languages is about the ancient languages of the Bible. I took Spanish 3 times, never passed. Can I get a witness? What am I doing? What am I doing in? I kind of passed. I'm here today. I'm in this class, and he's like, there's 3 languages. There's the ancient Hebrew, there's the Aramaic, and then there's the Koine Greek, and this is what we discovered. Ancient Hebrew. My professor is so smart that he is breaking down, reading, writing, teaching us ancient Hebrew. Then the next semester of class, we're going through the ancient Greek, okay? And he is so smart that he's able to teach us to be able to do it, right? Anybody grateful when the teacher grades on a curve? Holy smokes. At one point, true story, he's like, all of you guys got D's, but we're grading on a curve. There is a God. And we got, get me out of this class. This class is not nurturing my soul. This class is rough, right? But I remember being in that class, and I'm talking to the smartest person I've ever talked to about the Bible. And I'm like, I have a question. What about dinosaurs? And I ask him this in class, in the middle of his lecture, right? And he goes, he walks over to the whiteboard. He draws a boat. Then he draws a window on the boat. Then he draws 2 dinosaur heads coming out of the window. And he goes, dinosaurs didn't fit on the ark. And I was like, all right. Dinosaurs. Pretty sure I remember watching a documentary as a young child of the Flintstones and Dino, and I thought I saw a human being riding a brontosaurus with a crane attached to its neck, and I thought that's how all this happened. But science would say, hey, the Earth's actually 65 billion years old, right? Earth's way old. The Earth's way old. Science goes, hey, somewhere along the way, there was this giant meteor that hit, right? And it hit somewhere in this peninsula in Mexico. And it's so large that it created this dust cloud that filled the whole earth and choked out all the dinosaurs, and they died. And that's why we have dinosaur bones, because they existed so long ago. They're dead. Humans never lived with dinosaurs. That came afterward because mammals then took over in the evolutionary kind of sequence after that. So the mammals kind of became the predominant thinking species. And so science has an answer for dinosaurs. But you know what? I'll take the ark, and they didn't fit on the ark. That works just fine for me. That's fine. But in that same class, guys, I asked the teacher about this scripture and about how to understand this. And he taught me something that has forever shaped the way I will ever pick up the Bible, the way I will ever study the scriptures. And I want to pass this on to you. The Bible, he taught me, can never mean what it never meant. You turn the person next to you to say that. The Bible can never mean what it never meant. The Bible can never mean what it never meant. So when the scriptures were written to a certain group of people at a certain time, in a certain place, in a certain culture, with certain current events, with a lot going on. Are you with me? And sometimes we take the Bible and we try to apply it directly to our life based off what we think that it was written, right? We're like, God, there's this girl at church. She's on the worship team. Good night. I would really like to ask her for her number. I kind of feel like when she worships, she looks at me. I kind of feel like she draws me close to God. I kind of feel like she's the one. I kind of feel like I need to learn the drums, join the team. I'm going to go to your word. Proverbs. He who finds a wife finds a good thing. I knew it. She's the one. She's the one. When are the auditions? And then you just creep this girl out every single day in my church because you are ignorant, here we go, to the literary genres of the scriptures. Okay? So the scriptures were written, I'm shooting off the hip here, but I'm trying to remember. 1,500 years, I think, was the total time that the scriptures was written. Ain't no other book in your library written across 1,500 years, y'all, okay? It's a long time, 1,500 years, 3 different continents, multiple, 5, 6, 7 different genres of literature, whether that's the narrative or whether that's the Gospels or whether that's letters written to people or apocalyptic like Revelation or wisdom or poetry. There's all these different categories that they go in. It's written by 40 different authors, okay? 66 books, somebody fact check me, 40 different authors, Kings wrote part of the Bible. But peasants also wrote part of the Bible, right? Farmers wrote the Bible. Shepherds wrote the Bible. Warriors wrote the Bible. Worship team members wrote the Bible. There's all sorts of different people, perspectives, and they're writing to certain places at certain times, and they're in literary kind of categories. And what if I told you that in that class I learned something that might help some of you guys today? The Bible's can never mean what it never meant. And Genesis, what we just read, is actually in its own literary genre, just like Proverbs would be. Genesis is a creation poem. Up until the last 150 years, people weren't looking at this thing. That's a Western mind that's like, oh, it's literal, this and this and this and this. Dude, part of the Bible is literal, but not everything is supposed to be taken literal. Are you with me? Like, the resurrection of Jesus is literal. That really happened. But when Jesus talks about the parable of the Good Samaritan, he's creating a point about Good Samaritan and racism and loving our neighbor and God's, but there was never actually a Good Samaritan. That's a story he made up to create a timeless truth. Are you with me? You read Proverbs, and these things are true, but they're not always true. They're true isms. They're like Aesop's fable, right? Was there really a boy who cried wolf? Or was that the story that helped so many people? Maybe there was an actual boy who cried wolf, and they have excavated his body, and they found him, and he's in a museum somewhere. Or maybe this was a truth that a village or a grandfather or a parent made sure to pass on so that they knew. The moral of the story, the boy who cried wolf, is nobody believes a liar even when he's telling the truth. That's true, right? Okay. Some of you guys are like, where's he going with this? Where's he going with this? The snake talked. It was a talking snake. Listen, it does not, it really, you got to be careful with how what I'm about to say impacts your faith. Because whether you believe everything is absolutely literal and it's 24-hour periods of time and blah, 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 or you believe that science reveals everything we know except for the origin of life, reveals all these other things within the context of a creator, both of those things, you got to understand, like, they're both hard to believe. They're both going to take faith, right? I'll say it this way. If you balk at the idea of a talking snake in the Bible, you're going to have a really hard time following Jesus because there's a lot of harder things to do following Jesus than believing a talking snake. God's going to ask you to do much harder things and to have greater faith than believing in a talking snake. Trust. Okay? So let's just not start making one the smart. Are you guys with me on this? But when we look at the poem, it's actually a couple poems converged. These poems you see, like you'll see the first part of the scripture is written out this way, and then you see it kind of indents and kind of hangs over here with some quotes and some italics, and you're like, that's because this is an excerpt of a poem. And when you read it in the original language, in that Hebrew, you start to realize, oh, the letters match up with the letters beneath it. And there's like a cadence to it, and there's stanzas, and there's almost like a rhyming, and it sounds different when you read it. Oh, it's a poem. When Adam wakes up and sees Eve, and he's like, you are bone of my bone, you are flesh of my flesh. That's a song. It's a love song. It's a love song communicating his feelings for the person that he's no longer alone. Are you with me on this? This is a love song. Adam was not that smart out the gate. He was not a stud like that. You can't just freestyle like that, okay? It's convergence there. So you look at the poems, right? And you see, okay, let's just read it together. Maybe we can meet halfway in between these two views and get somewhere today. In the beginning, God created. Say, God created. The heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and the darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and to separate the light from the darkness. The darkness he called light. God called the light what? Day. And the darkness he called night, and there was evening, and there was morning, and that was the first what? What if I told you the word day doesn't mean 24 hours? It's the word yom. Say yom. It's a Hebrew word. And it means era. Okay? It's an undetermined amount of time. It's not 24 hours. So you read this idea that God creates, and then he begins to say that there was the era of this, and then there was the era of that. If you want to go literal on it, it's a little bit challenging because if the first day, what was created on the first day? Light. And then what was created on the fourth day? The sun. So that's kind of hard. How are you going to have light without the sun? Or the moon, right? But then again, in Revelation 21 and 22, says that when Jesus returns, that we will not need the sun because the glory will fill the earth of God, and that will be all the light that we need. So you're reading this, and you're looking at this, you're like, oh, okay, so it's a poem. Well, who's reading this poem? Why a poem? Why not just say exactly the way it was? Well, because this poem existed before there was a written language. This is some of the oldest literature in the world. The people who are hearing this and who are also reading it for the first time are the same people that had been in slavery in Egypt for not decades, centuries. Their grandfather's grandfather was a slave. They had never had a day off. They had been working every day. They had been a tool for a pharaoh in an empire. They had no worth. They had no self-worth. Their self-image was basically that of a worthless servant whose life meant nothing. And they worshipped the gods that the Egyptians worshipped. And what kind of gods were those? The sun, Amun-Ra, right? The moon, the Nile, the created things. But there's this super subversive narrative that had been traced back to their ancestry before they were ever in captivity, and that was the story, that was the poem that their granddads were sitting around the campfire telling them that we believe a bigger story. We don't believe and worship the sun. We believe and worship the God who created the sun, the one God who created the moon and hung the stars. This is the voice that we listen to. This is where it begins. Are you guys with me? So now you realize that there's actually a reason for this poem, and it's to explain something to them, and it's not to explain how Earth started. The Bible is not teaching us about science. The Bible is teaching us about God. This creation story is not teaching them about Earth. It's teaching them about the creator of the earth. So when they read it, they're like, wait, you mean to tell me that I have a creator? That the gods aren't angry at me? You mean to tell me that this God worked 6 days and then took one off and I get a day off? I've never had a day off in my life. I've been a slave. He wants me to rest? Wait a minute. Does that mean he cares about me? Wait a minute. Does that mean I'm valuable to him? Are you guys with me this morning? So you look at the Bible, who it was written to and why, and this is going to encourage our faith today because even though the Bible is timeless, it is also timely, and I'm trying to arrive at a point today that maybe it's not literal, maybe it's not absolutely literal, maybe it's also not completely defunct maybe we're here, maybe somewhere in the middle. Documentary was made about this back in 1992 with one of my favorite scholars, Pauly Shore, I believe was his name. This movie came out in 1992. I don't know if you happened right here in the San Fernando Valley, actually. Happened right here in the Great 1-8. And a chilling new comedy in full Neander vision. Neander vision. Like Neanderthal? Like Neanderthal vision, Neander vision? Okay. You ever seen this sequence of evolution, right? You have the different types of Homo whatever. You get to the last one is the Homo erectus, and the Homo erectus is the Homo means man, and then erectus means straight up. And you see him here, and he's kind of straightening his back. And then there's this jump that goes from Homo erectus to Encino Man with a skateboard. It's called the Homo sapien. And the Homo sapien, erectus means straight up, and sapien means thinking. And there is this obvious jump between two, what some would say, species. There was this mankindish era of evolution, but they were more animal than man. But then there's something that happened that scientists would agree about maybe 10,000 years ago. there was a crazy jump between Homo erectus and Homo sapien, and there's just no missing link that we have in between them. It's just a drastic jump. And in that jump, we find intelligence. We find one of them. We found in like I'm a scholar, like my science buddies. We found this Homo sapien in Siberia. They have found, in Siberia, agriculture, taking care of the earth. You find drawings and paintings, art. That is not natural selection, guys, art. You find music. You find marriage. And you find these things happening in this Homo sapien, and you realize something has happened. And there's no evidence of any kind of jumping of species over here in this theory. It's all common ancestry. And yet, this is the tricky part. Because, as one conservative author and scholar wrote, there's much agreement between the biblical and scientific data on the age of the first true Homo sapiens. This is true humans who lived in villages, practiced agriculture. Scientists generally date the origin of such species to less than 10,000 years ago. And even as they date other human-like beings, much older. Furthermore, their studies are now concluding that there was a first human female, mitochondrial Eve, and a first human male, Y chromosomal Adam. And these are genetically unconnected to other Homo species, such as Homo erectus. Now that kind of sounds like something that I read in Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, it says, the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. Well, does that conflict with evolution? Because isn't one of the staples of evolution that all living matter came from non-living matter? What's dust? Listen to this incredible poem. There's a God who decided by choice that he was going to create. Turn to the person next to you and say, you're a choice. And he spoke all these things into existence. Bam, 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 bam. But then he said, my final and crowning achievement will be more than good. It will be very good. Turn to the person next to you and say, you are very good. And the poem goes that God doesn't speak this man into existence. But he gets down on his knees and he scoops together the dust, the non-living matter, and he puts his mouth on the creation. He breathes his ruach, which in Hebrew means spirit, but is also translated breath. He breathes his spirit, or his breath is spirit, into, mouth to this human that he's creating. I don't think it gets more intimate than that. There's a creator, and he's like, I want to do something with creation. I want to make them different. I want their breath and their life to come from me into them. I want that to give them something that there's never been had before, that separates them from everything else. A new creation. What's in me will be reflected in them. And he says, we will make God, and we will make man, and we will make him in our what? Image. In Genesis chapter 1, it continues this conversation. Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds of the sky, and over the livestock, and over the wild animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image, and in his image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. You're a choice. You matter to God. You were put here for a reason. You're connected to a purpose. You are not just some animal. You are not some sack of meat. You are not just this consequence of events. Come on, you are a soul. You are made in the very image of the Creator himself, a Creator who's best described as love. You love people because God first loved you. You write music about how much you love them. You draw pictures about it. You have marriage. You feel betrayed. You could feel emotional pain. No. You're not here thinking about yourself. You are here with value and with worth, as it's almost there was a finger that came down from heaven. He lifted your head and said, you are connected to me. Your identity comes from me. You have worth because you have a Creator. So now, because you have a Creator, you have value. And what does that do? What kind of chain reactions does that set off? If you have intrinsic value based on who you are because your Creator has chosen you, now suddenly you have to treat other people differently because they have value too. Now you have value because God created you. You have value because God created you. You were made in the image of God. Violence has no place. You are made in the image of God. You are sacred. And I have to treat you that way based on the worldview that's been set in my spiritual DNA as an image bearer and reflector of the Most High God. I have worth. Other people have worth. Do you understand how important the creation poem is? Can we not get hung up on how literal the days were? And can we get hung up on how powerful the love of God is? That He would choose you in your mess, in your dust, in your whatever you find yourself today, and say, I will always be the author, the finisher of life. If you want my spirit, I'm here to give it.